Thank you all for joining us live today. Blue Courage is honored to be partnering with Thomas Leland and presenting this web series, Exploring Blue Culture. Today, we'll be focusing on foundations and definitions, and we're joined today by Michael Nila, founder and master trainer with Blue Courage, Jack Hart, captain of San Francisco Police Department, master trainer, Blue Courage, and cultural anthropologists, Robert Adams and Ken Price. I will now turn it over to Jack to get us going.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you so much to everyone from Thomas Leland and the Blue Courage team for getting this webinar and the website and all of these great thought leaders together in one place. And a special thanks to all of you. Your most precious gift is time, and for you sharing this half an hour with us, we hope that it's going to be special and meaningful to you. Well, Dr. Covey, I guess, was right, that the actions of a police officer in an instant can impact a person for life and communities for generations. But maybe even Dr. Covey underestimated it, because we now know that the actions of a police officer in 8 minutes and 46 seconds can impact the entire world. There is tremendous uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity for policing in communities, even already in the midst of a pandemic, a looming economic collapse, polarized political partisanship, and a leadership vacuum at all levels. Things are really, really hard right now for policing and for communities. We are certainly out of our comfort zones. But in this state of tremendous dis-ease, it is time for us to turn inward, to find our humanity and our role in connection and interconnection. I mean, should policing or any of our public policy be continued in its current form if it is built around biases and stereotypes and tensions like this? Let's discover what both community and policing want and need together. Let's have a revelation and a journey. We believe that the driver of this discussion is the architecture and artistry in building a strong, healthy culture in policing for both those who serve and who are served. So Michael, Nila, good morning from the Blue Courage team. You know, as a former police executive who's been around policing for over 50 years, you've probably seen it all, both in uniform and as a consultant, an instructor for Franklin Covey, even as an author of the book, The Nobility of Policing, for which that Covey quote is referenced. And now with Blue Courage, I mean, you've seen the profession evolve in many ways and remain stagnant in others. In the development of Blue Courage's 9 models, you put police culture as the second module after foundations. I suspect that this was done intentionally. How did you get interested in police culture and on this literal quest to understand it and shape it?
Well, thank you for that, and thank you for everybody who's joining us today, and particularly our distinguished panelists who are going to help us guide this exploration of culture so that we can get to a better place that's well thought out, that's informed, and that will guide us to a better future. But when you say I've been in policing for over 50 years, it's like 50 years in a couple of days. So it's not that bad. But through all my experience, I was always fascinated by police behavior. Why do police officers behave the way that they do? And what are those influences that cause us to, when we raise our hand, take an oath, we take it as one human being, and then we come on the job and the years and the experiences begin to change us. And I think every police officer, with rare exception, would say that the job has changed them, and the people in our lives see that. And I believe that the greatest influencer on us, on our police officers, really is culture. And so when we set out to create Blue Courage, the intention was to close the gaps between what police officers are taught from academy through in-service training all the way through retirement, to close the gaps between what they're taught and what they need to thrive in this profession. And what are they not taught? So in Blue Courage, we're teaching the things that is traditionally not taught to police officers. And we knew immediately that we had to address the issue of culture, because culture is one of the most powerful of influencers on who we are, what we become. And there's healthy aspects of police culture and there's unhealthy aspects of it. But we are a participant in that culture. So to address that, by the way, I was grateful to have one of my good friends, York Schmitz, who's a partner in Thomas Leland with Ken Price, introduced me to Ken, and Ken immediately was interested in how we influence culture as police officers, but also helping to guide us to understand what we really didn't know about culture. So I was fascinated to begin to learn from Ken, and what was even more fascinating was I thought I knew what culture was, But as I started to learn it through the lens of a cultural anthropologist, I realized I didn't know much about culture or how it's shaped or how it's influenced and how we can shift it. So grateful for that partnership with Ken. And of course, he has now introduced us to Robert. So our panelists are growing here.
It's great. And it sounds like you've almost predicted the need for a rigorous examination of culture. And here we are, desperately needing to understand it so that we can shift it. You know, when we talk about culture, I always think of culture shock. And I recently read a book by Alvin Toffler, who wrote a book called Future Shock. And in it, he sort of differentiated between this idea of culture shock and future shock. So in culture shock, like, you know, a college-age student will enter a foreign volunteer service and go to an emerging world country. But when they're there and they arrive, they become overwhelmed emotionally and all their senses, caused by the unknown world around them. But what gets them through, Toffler argued, was the realization that they can go back to the known world that they came from, so that there is this cure to culture shock, which is going back to the culture that is known. But Alvin Toffler said this about future shock. He said, future shock is different, that when there is so much change under a tight timeline, and it's just this unease and unsteadiness and not knowing what the future holds, people will also find themselves in this state of shock. But the challenge of future shock, however, is that there's no stepping back into the comforts of the past. And I really feel that that has applicability, if not in 2014, definitely now here in 2020. And that really the entire profession of policing and its members, regardless of formal or informal rank, how much time you have in the business, large jurisdiction, small jurisdiction, I feel like we're all reeling from these past few weeks. So Dr. Price, as a cultural anthropologist yourself, who has brought these principles of cultural understanding and transformation from the classroom to C-suite boardrooms and everywhere in between, why is culture the defining value proposition for finding our way out of this panic and free fall that we're in forward to really save the heart and soul of policing?
First off, Jack, let me thank you and Michael and Robert for bringing me to this conversation with you today. And I'm reminded when you were describing culture shock about my own personal experiences as a student, exactly as you described. And one thing I've learned in the last few decades that I've been trying to understand culture, and I'm not sure I'm fully there yet, but what I've been trying to understand has taught me that I think culture shock is future shock, ultimately, because there's no going back. You may feel that you are going to go back before you get back. Until you get back, you realize there is no back. It's only forward. I think the events that have triggered us to come together today, which I'm grateful for the opportunity to come together, and I'm pained at the source of the trigger to this conversation. It's a difficult conversation. What I feel we need to recognize is that I agree that culture is central to the question of how we can begin to heal this pain and grow beyond it. At the same time, we need to understand perhaps that culture is not the thing itself that we need to look at. I think culture is the area in which we may find answers. And so exploring in this conversation about what is culture first, and to your question, Michael, you know, you say you're still learning. I'm still very much learning. What is culture? The conversations we've had in preparation for this have taught me so much about the experience in policing and culture. I think that we need to, as I see it, jump in now to understand what is the relationship between the question of culture and the path forward in policing and more broadly in society. I think we can't really look at policing outside of society. I think that's really the relationship that we're going to want to explore in these conversations.
So what is the definition of culture? I mean, I think that's a great thing. I mean, police chiefs and all members of people in the profession always do a good job of like coming in on your first day and saying, I'm here to change the culture of the organization that we're in. And clearly there are calls to change the culture of policing. And yet we don't really know what it is. So what is the definition of culture? Like, what is it and what isn't it?
So culture just on the sort of high definitional level are the beliefs, the values, the behaviors, the attitudes that are shared by a group of people. What is unique when you start looking at organizations and organizational culture, such as what we are in the case with policing, is what we're looking at is those values, beliefs, behaviors that are expected, reinforced, and rewarded by the group. And that's a very important distinction upon the initial definition of, it's just the collected group values, beliefs, and behaviors, because when you say that these are expected, reinforced, and rewarded, those effectively become levers for us to make choices about culture, especially as leaders. And I think one thing I know we're going to be discussing is even who are the leaders. There are traditional leaders and there are informal leaders in that process as to who is actually setting expectations, who is demonstrating and role modeling, reinforcing, and how are we rewarded? What do we get for doing what is expected as the right cultural set of values, beliefs, and behaviors? So that's the point of departure on organization culture, is to see how there's two things. You have the culture that you currently have that has brought you from history to where you are now, and then there's the culture that we would aspire to. And I think that's where a lot of this conversation is going to be directed.
Yeah, very interesting how you mentioned that, like who is responsible for the culture of the organization. I just did a academy graduation here in San Francisco, and it was right in March. I mean, right during the initial quarantine and the initial lockdowns in terms of the coronavirus, and all the recruits are masked and outside and all 6 feet away for this graduation. And when I was addressing them, I felt like this was really the first time in my 20 years that I didn't have anything to say, because I hadn't been there. I mean, sure, I've been to field training and I've worked the midnight shift and worked my way up through the organization, but I couldn't really equate what was happening because I didn't have anything in my brain to kind of like match this current experience with. And I felt like I was at a loss of wisdom. So I guess the question for you then would be, like, who is responsible then for culture? I mean, if police executives and police officers are all experiencing this tremendous shift and this real lightning rod moment that demands change and quickly at that, I guess we all have to chip in as best as we can in the areas that we can.
That's absolutely the case. I think we have a tendency, unfortunately, we've been hearing a lot in the last month or last 3 weeks or so that we need to change the culture of policing. And how do you do that? I think that's really what we're aiming to begin to address. I'm not sure we're going to fully answer because it is so complex. However, beginning to jump in on that question is going to really involve everybody. And I would encourage everyone who's joining us, everyone who's perhaps listening to this in a recorded fashion later, that we all have a key role in this. And critically, as I would just highlight from what I said earlier, is that this is not only about police officers, it's not only about people in the agencies, it is very much about everybody in society to consider, where are we on this question of what do I need to do differently in order to get to a better result?
Wow. And I know that in previous discussions, you've mentioned that leaders, formal leaders, must be both in the organization and above it. It's kind of like an undercover boss situation. You have to be in it to understand the complexities and the nuances of people doing the job, but also above the organization, trying to guide it and to go where it needs to go. Would you offer that advice for current formal leaders in organizations, to be both in and above the organization? And if that is the case, I'm also moved by the language of leadership and the language of culture. So if you're in and around and above the organization, should you be keying into key factors that tip you off as to what's going on in your own organization? And is language a good indicator of the health and status of the culture that you might be in?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a really important topic. I think when we are the formal leaders, as you're describing, Jack, I think that we almost, in the work that we do, we consider that everybody to some extent can maybe take a page from anthropology as a discipline. I mean, our methodology in anthropology is participant observation. And that's an interesting union if you consider it, because you have, on the one hand, to participate, and that doesn't mean just kind of hanging around. It means you're actually involved and you have skin in the game. That's participating. And through that relationship with the people and the groups that you're working with as an anthropologist, you build trust, and you're able to then step back and sort of take that overview that you were just describing. And so I believe that there are lessons from that approach for leaders, especially formal leaders, but for anyone who is in a position of influence in a group, to say, you know, how can I both be in and above, inside and outside simultaneously, in order to really listen from the inside experience and observe and direct, potentially shift on the values and the beliefs and behaviors where we learn that we need to.
Wow, Dr. Price, thank you so much. And I know this isn't the end of our discussion. This is just the very beginning. And I look forward to diving deeper into that lexicon of leadership and culture with you and all these panelists and future panelists in these upcoming webinars to discuss specifically how we get there. We can be aware of it, but we got to dive into it. And that wisdom, I think, is certainly going to help us moving forward. So thank you. So Dr. Robert Adams, Jr., thank you so much for being on the call.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Well, you too are a cultural anthropologist. You specialize in diversity and inclusion, mindful leadership, organizational change, strategic planning. Drawing from your vast experience as both a Fulbright scholar, your academic and research roles that you've had, or even really as your work as the Chief Operating Officer for the Martin Luther King Jr. Center for Nonviolent Social Change in Atlanta, how does policing leverage this moment to not only be on the right side of history, but on really the right side of the future through cultural transformation?
So I think part of it is recognizing the particular moment that we all find ourselves in. Right now, America's in crisis. The COVID-19 pandemic, the economic distress, and the heightened political divisions are creating a loss of confidence about American institutions in general to meet our basic needs. And policing has not been exempt from this loss of public support. And it's only been exacerbated by the use of the police as a forceful response to public demonstrations of dissatisfaction about the American crisis in general. And so it's created a real, I think, insider-outsider moment about reform, that there is a growing support for police reform. It's unmistakable. Now, part of what policing can do is go through some self-reflection and figure out how to harmonize with the moment, how to leverage this as an opportunity. Because in every crisis, it's a moment for transformation. There are opportunities of open-mindedness and vulnerability that emerge that can be leveraged for change. And so in this particular context, I believe that, you know, in the movie from the 1980s, Baghdad Cafe, the title song says, "I'm calling you, can you hear me?" Right? And I think this is the real question for policing. Despite the hurtful and disappointing critiques that come out about policing, can they hear in the same moment that it really is a cry for help? And it's a cry for every institution to reinvent itself and to contribute to a restoration of confidence, a restoration of hope. And in that invitation, how are the police departments across this country going to respond to the moment? How are they going to, in some ways, answer the call and rise and shine to the possibilities of transformation? And part of that requires confronting their own suspicions about some of these calls and about some of the broad range of the call, because there's a vast variety of proposals being put out there, some that are a little, I would say, more palpable, more sort of agreeable, some that seem a lot more radical. But to not move away from the critique itself, but to figure out how they can join in and co-lead these reforms and co-lead a vision of what democratic policing should be for American communities. And at the heart of this effort to try to figure out how to align policing with reform, I think there's the reflection should bring about a bridging of the gap between self and service. It should be a reflection on vocation. And, one philosopher defines vocation as the place where your deep gladness meets the world's needs. So we both have to reinvigorate police officers across the country and align that and illuminate how that meets the world's needs. Because I do believe that there is a need for police. There is a need for this culture, and there's a need for police leadership. But, and I think that's what Blue Courage is, this process through which the journey happens. And it's a reflection tool that helps you to imagine this. Because in the end, love and hope are going to be the antidotes to this fear. So as we engage around the waning public trust, we have to lean in to our trust, to trust ourselves that we have the ability and the capacity to turn the situation around. Because finally, I believe that, as June Jordan said, we are the ones we have been waiting for. This is the moment is now, and the challenge is looming, but we have what it takes to meet the challenge and move things forward.
I love that. And especially this fierce urgency of now, as Martin Luther King Jr. said. There's a couple of comments, even in the chat box, talking about, in your research and experience, is it accurate to state that police culture transformations by an organization may take approximately 10 years, And also another comment talking about trying to shift culture from the outside in. That's why I even like your comments to both of you saying that, an attack on the culture encompasses everything in the culture, which I think kills hope for people within organizations where it's like, well, we might be bad, but there's really healthy parts of our culture too that we want to preserve. And maybe all the panelists can talk about that in terms of, changes in leadership, changes in things that are external. We don't have time for that, and how do we take charge by safeguarding the healthy aspects of our culture while quickly implementing rapid change that we need that's palatable and possible without putting us all in shock?
I'll just quickly respond to that. I think that's very insightfully accurate in my experience, that in order to begin this kind of process and commitment to deliver on change, which is really improvement, it's not just change, but it's improvement, you need to understand and recognize, what are we doing that's working? And we need to reinforce that as much as we need to look for the opportunities for what we want to improve. And I think it's critically important in this process that, and there was a note as well in the questions. I mean, these changes need to come from within, and I would add, it's important to have influences and voices that are not necessarily from within at the same time, so that you can get fresh perspectives. But it does definitely have to be owned and moved, by the people who are most affected. I would only offer again that the people most affected are, again, police and society, both.
Well, thank you. I know my amygdala is telling me at this moment to go into fight or flight, one or the other, being all in or being all out. But I love how you're talking about being vulnerable to really take this to listen, but also to courageously act at this moment in history. So I will open this up to the group, and Michael, maybe you can start, but what is this collaboration between Thomas Leland and Blue Courage through this Exploring Blue Culture series? And so we've just scratched the surface today, but what can we expect in upcoming webinars, including the one this Friday?
Yeah, well, first of all, I can't be more excited just hearing the voices of Robert and Ken, and also the voices of our attendees who are weighing in and giving us comments and are educating us and informing us in this process. So the vision that we have with this collaboration, and I have to give all the credit to Ken, because about 2 weeks ago, he I think on a Saturday night said, "Hey, we need to talk. What can we do?" And by the way, Ken's not the only one. I've been talking to Simon Sinek almost every day, and he is lending his support and his advocacy and his voice and his insight to this initiative as well. He's standing with us and is here to help us in any way that he can. So I couldn't be more excited about this opportunity, because I believe this moment, while we are all paying attention, we are all engaged, we are all laser focused on this state of policing in the society, we have an opportunity to influence the future immensely. So our vision is that we wanted to just start a collaboration, start a dialogue, and we felt the best, easiest way was through this webinar, where we're going to have a series of webinars. We're going to bring voices to the field. On Friday, we're going to have Chief Hart from Houston and from Major City Chiefs talking about, the real life application of many of these things and the challenges that we face. This is an exploration of both where we are, how we got here, and more importantly, what is the blueprint for us to execute. And we're hoping that that blueprint will inform government leaders. One of the things that scares the heck out of me today is a lot of decisions, big decisions are being made within a couple of days. And I wonder how thoughtful they are and what unintended consequences will arise from there. So we want to have an intelligent, informed discussion with experts like Robert and Ken and Simon Sinek and others who will help us in this effort, and also our people in the field, those of you who have joined us today. And we want this collaboration to grow so that we can we acknowledge the pain, we can figure out a path to healing, and then we figure out a path to healthy growth that will get us to a better place. We're here to learn, we're here to discover. That's what exploring is all about. We'll explore with both the experts and the practitioners and any community members or anybody who wants to join us in this initiative. And we'll have a series of webinars, and they'll go on as long as we need to, but at the end, we're going to be producing hopefully a document, maybe some white papers that will help us. And we need your hearts, your minds, your experience to help us, as you already are, first by being here, second of all by sending us your insights.
Yeah, that we will definitely incorporate, not only in our discussions that we're going to be having after this webinar, but in planning the future ones. So thank you for those questions and answers. Thank you for your comments in the chat box. We will preserve those and definitely incorporate those to get them answered coming up. And of course, we invite you to go to growbluecourage.com, and we'll put up a way that you can contact us so that you can continue, that this can truly be a dialogue. But as we come to the end of this half an hour, could you maybe I'll start with Michael and kind of go along to Ken and then Robert. Could you please share something, what is coming to heart and mind right now for you into not only what we've heard so far, but really where we're going?
Well, just for me, just real quickly, I've experienced the pain, the excitement, the euphoria, the broken heart that this job brings to it. I mean, it's just the nature of the beast. But there's so much evidence of hope that's out there. On Monday, I had to shoot Requalify on the range, and as I'm waiting for the range master, I'm standing outside the range, and in the classroom across from the range, they're doing defensive tactics training, skills fighting, for fighting. And I peeked my head in, and they were playing Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech. And I thought, wow, in this fighting class to build the skills for defensive tactics, they're also influencing the hearts and minds of these officers in terms of how they use the skills that they're about to learn. And they were doing that before they ever taught them the skills. So there's a whole lot of right things going on in our profession. And that's why I'm excited about this opportunity for dialogue, because we're going to hear the pain and we're going to hear the hope and the opportunity that's in front of us.
Thanks. Ken?
What comes to mind for me, honestly, Jack, I am extraordinarily humbled by this conversation and what we're jumping into. I just feel that events have culminated in this moment for the day. We're going to carry it forward again Friday. We're going to carry it forward for the next few weeks. I'm very grateful for this opportunity, and I'm reminded that my father, in his career, was a peace officer as well, and so I think, like many people in this experience, it's very personal and it's very social. It's very much part of our daily lives, and I think having the opportunity to not wade in, but jump in, which takes courage, and I'm a little nervous about it, as I might have said earlier, I think it's a gift, and I appreciate it. I look forward to the conversation with everybody in this call.
Thank you. Robert.
I'm appreciative of the invitation to join with you all to try to be part of the change that we want to see. That's the only way that we're going to move things forward and allow everyone to come out of this renewed and, and be appreciative of this as really as part of a restorative justice journey. So I'm very happy to be a part of it. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I have one question for all of you on this webinar. Regardless of how you found your way into this profession, are you bigger than this moment in history, or is this moment in history bigger than you? Are we as a profession bigger than this moment in history, or is this moment bigger than us? So let's recommit right now to the oath that we took, no matter how long ago, and to have the courage to recommit, come together, and transform the world by transforming ourselves and thereby our culture. Michael, Ken, Robert, thank you. Thank you all very much for joining us. Looking forward to seeing you on Friday. Becky, back to you.
Thank you all for joining us today again, and to our panelists. Thank you for taking the time to share your wisdom with us today, and Jack for guiding us through our session. And as a reminder, like Michael said, Friday will be our Voices from the Field session, and we will be joined by Chief Acevedo from the Houston Police Department. So we do encourage everyone to email us at info@bluecourage.com if you have any questions for the chief that you would like our panelists to address on Friday. We'll do our best to get to those. Also, as a reminder, this was recorded, so we will be broadcasting it on YouTube and Facebook, so you will have a chance to review it and share it. And please go to, we now have a website, www.growbluecourage.com. Please visit us there, and we will have the PDF and some notes from today's session on there for you, as well as we will be sending them out to everyone who joined us today. So thank you again, and we will see you all Friday. Have a great rest of your day.